Standing beside my husband's grave, I never imagined that a single text message would shatter everything I believed about my family. The words glowing on my phone screen made my blood run cold. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. But that wasn't the worst part. The message that followed would destroy any trust I had left in this world. Don't trust our sons. Have you ever discovered that the people you love most are capable of unthinkable evil? Have you ever had to choose between protecting yourself and destroying what's left of your family? My name is Margaret Hayes, and at 66 years old, I thought I knew everything about love, loss, and betrayal. I was wrong about everything. What I'm about to tell you happened in the quiet town of Spring Creek, where everyone knows everyone and secrets are supposed to be impossible to keep. But some secrets are so dark, so unthinkable, that they hide in plain sight, wearing the mask of family love until the very moment they destroy you. The funeral for Ernest, my husband of 42 years, was supposed to be the end of our story together. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare I could never have imagined. As dirt fell on his casket and I said my final goodbye, I had no idea that everything the people I trusted most had told me was a lie. I had no idea that the man I was burying wasn't supposed to be dead. And I certainly had no idea that my own sons, the babies I had nursed and raised with endless love, were the ones responsible for putting him there. The morning started like any other day in our small town. Ernest had left for his bicycle repair shop before dawn, just as he had every day for over 4 decades. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch when the phone rang with an urgency that sent ice through my veins. Mrs. Hayes, this is Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately. The world stopped spinning. My legs turned to water, and I grabbed the kitchen counter to keep from collapsing. Ernest was careful, meticulous in everything he did. How could this have happened? My neighbor Doris had to drive me to the hospital because my hands were shaking too violently to hold the keys. During that endless journey, my mind refused to process what was happening. Ernest was strong, healthy for his 70 years. Whatever had happened, he would fight through it. He always did. When we arrived at the hospital, I was surprised to find Charles and Henry already there, pacing in the waiting room. How have they gotten there so quickly? I was the emergency contact. I was the one who should have been called first. But in my desperation to see my husband, I didn't pause to question this detail that would later haunt me. "Mom," Charles said, pulling me into what seemed like a genuine embrace. "Dad's in critical condition. One of the machines at his shop exploded. He has severe burns and traumatic brain injury." Henry's eyes were red-rimmed, but something in his expression felt wrong. He looked nervous rather than devastated, like someone waiting for important news rather than someone grieving for his father. "Can I see him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Only immediate family. One at a time and for 5 minutes maximum," the nurse explained with professional compassion when I entered that sterile ICU room. My heart shattered. Ernest was connected to a dozen beeping machines, his face and arms wrapped in bandages. I barely recognized the man who had kissed me goodbye that morning. His breathing was artificial, forced by machines that seemed to be the only things keeping him tethered to life. I took his hand, the only part of his body that seemed untouched by whatever had happened. "Ernest, my love, I'm here. You're going to be okay. You always bounce back." For just a moment, I felt the slightest pressure from his fingers. His eyes moved behind closed lids, and I knew with absolute certainty that he was fighting to return to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in uncomfortable waiting room chairs and drinking bitter coffee from vending machines. Charles and Henry took turns staying with me, but they seemed more interested in talking to doctors about insurance policies and medical costs than in comforting their dying father. Overheard fragments of conversations that should have alarmed me then. Henry asking about the expense of long-term care. Charles on his phone discussing life insurance policies and beneficiaries. Why were they worried about money when Ernest was fighting for his life? Mom, Charles said on the second day, we've reviewed Dad's insurance situation. He has a life insurance policy worth $50,000. There's also a workers' compensation policy that could pay out another $25,000. I don't care about money, I snapped. I just want your father to recover. Of course. Mom, he replied, but I caught something cold in his eyes. A calculating look that chilled me on the third day. Dr. Patterson delivered news that destroyed my world. Mrs. Hayes, I need to be honest with you. Your husband's condition is critical. The burns have become infected, and the brain trauma is more severe than we initially thought. We need to prepare for the worst. What does that mean? I asked, though my heart already knew. It means we could keep him alive indefinitely, but his quality of life would be non-existent. He would never regain consciousness. My world crumbled. 42 years of marriage, a lifetime of shared dreams and quiet moments, all disappearing like smoke. I want to try everything, I said through tears. I don't care about the cost or how long it takes. But Charles exchanged a meaningful look with Henry that made my stomach turn. Mom, we have to be practical. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden. A burden. The word hit me like a physical blow. He's your father, not a burden. He's the man who raised you, who worked his entire life to give you everything he could. We know, Mom, Henry chimed in with false sympathy. But we have to think about you too. The medical bills will be enormous. They could destroy your savings. Again, money. Always money. My husband was dying, and they were calculating costs like accountants. That night, alone with Ernest in his hospital room, I held his hand and whispered to him as if he could hear every word. My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine life without you. Then something happened that still gives me chills. His fingers moved, squeezing mine with unmistakable intention. His lips moved as if trying to speak, but no sound emerged. I called for the nurses, desperate. He's responding. He's trying to communicate. But by the time they arrived, Ernest had returned to his previous state. The nurse checked his monitors and shook her head with practiced sympathy. Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, Mrs. Hayes. It doesn't mean he's conscious. But I knew what I had felt. Ernest had tried to tell me something important. He had fought through whatever darkness held him to reach me one last time. 2 days later, at 4:37 in the morning, the machines began their final terrible symphony. Alarms shrieked, lights flashed, and nurses rushed into Ernest's room. I was dozing in the hallway when the commotion woke me, and I ran toward the sound of my worst nightmare coming true. The medical team worked for 40 minutes trying to resuscitate him, but it was useless. Ernest was officially declared dead as I collapsed beside his bed, holding his still warm body and refusing to accept that he was gone forever. Charles and Henry arrived exactly 1 hour after their father's death. They came prepared with papers, documents, phone numbers for funeral homes. They seemed to have been expecting this call. We've already contacted Spring Creek Funeral Home, Charles informed me while I was still sobbing inconsolably. They can collect the body this morning. The insurance claim process is already underway. Henry added with business-like efficiency. How could they be so organized? So prepared, so utterly cold just 1 hour after losing their father. Something was fundamentally wrong, but my grief was so overwhelming that I couldn't think clearly enough to question their suspicious readiness. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. Charles handled all the arrangements without consulting me, choosing the cheapest casket and the briefest service possible. It's what Dad would have wanted. he said when I complained. Something simple, without fuss. But Ernest deserved better than this indecent rush to bury him and forget. He deserved honor, respect, time for people to say goodbye properly. The funeral day arrived gray and cold, as if the sky itself mourned Ernest's passing. I wore my only black dress, the same one I had worn to my mother's funeral years earlier. My hands trembled so violently that Doris had to help me with the buttons. "Be strong, Margaret," my dear friend whispered as she gently arranged my hair. "Ernest would want to see you strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, like an empty shell where a person used to live. 42 years of marriage doesn't just end with dirt on a coffin dot at the cemetery. I was shocked by how few people attended. Where were Ernest's co-workers from the shop? Where were the neighbors he had helped over the years? For a man who had lived 70 years in the same community and touched so many lives, the funeral felt strangely empty. "Where are the men from the shop?" I asked Charles. "We didn't want to trouble anyone," he replied quickly. Dad was a private person. He would have preferred something intimate. That was a lie. Ernest loved his community, cared deeply about his neighbors. He would have wanted them there to say goodbye properly. Why had Charles made everything so secretive, so rushed? During the service, I watched my sons with growing unease. Charles maintained a solemn expression appropriate for the occasion, but his eyes constantly darted to his watch. Henry seemed restless, as if he had more important places to be. Charles's wife, Jasmine, discreetly checked her phone. Behind her black veil, this was how they honored their father with impatience and distraction. The pastor spoke about eternal rest and divine peace. But his words felt hollow in my shattered heart. I didn't want Ernest to rest in peace. I wanted him to come home with me, to continue growing old together, to keep sharing coffee on our porch every evening. When it came time to throw dirt on the casket, my legs refused to support me. Doris had to hold me upright as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of earth hitting wood was so final, so conclusive, so hopeless. It was at that exact moment, standing beside my husband's grave, that my phone vibrated with a text message that would change everything. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket." My heart stopped. The letters seemed to dance before my eyes like a hallucination born of grief. I was losing my mind from the pain. With trembling fingers, I typed back, "Who are you?" The response came immediately, "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." The phone nearly slipped from my numb fingers. I caught it before it could fall, but Doris noticed my sudden change in demeanor. "Are you all right, Mom?" Charles asked, approaching with apparent concern. I stared at him, searching his face for any clue, any sign of deception. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every expression felt potentially dangerous. "I'm fine," I lied, clutching the phone in my purse. "I just need to go home." During the drive home, those messages consumed my thoughts. Was someone playing a cruel joke at the worst possible moment? Or was there really a chance that Ernest was alive somewhere? But if he was alive, who had we buried? And if he wasn't alive, who knew enough intimate details about our lives to write something so specific about our sons? That night, alone in the house that now felt like a tomb, I reviewed every detail of the past week. Ernest's accident had been strange from the beginning. According to Charles, a machine had exploded in the shop, but Ernest knew every wire and bolt in that place. He was obsessively careful about maintenance, paranoid about safety, and how had my sons reached the hospital so quickly when no one had called them? I was the emergency contact. The hospital had called me first. How did they know about the accident before I did? Then there was their immediate focus on money. From the very first day, Charles and Henry had discussed insurance policies and beneficiaries as if they had been preparing for this moment, waiting for it. I decided to examine Ernest's papers more carefully. In his old wooden desk, he kept all important documents in a metal lockbox. Insurance policies, the house deed, shop paperwork, everything was meticulously organized there. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy Charles had mentioned. But there was something I didn't remember. The policy had been updated just 6 months earlier, increasing coverage from $5,000 to $50,000. Why had Ernest increased his life insurance so dramatically? He had never mentioned this change, and more troubling, who had suggested he make it. Continuing my search, I discovered something even more disturbing, a workers' compensation policy I didn't know existed, purchased just 2 months before Ernest's death. $25,000 in case of accidental workplace death, $75,000 total. A fortune for a family like ours, but also a sum tempting enough to corrupt. Someone without moral boundaries. My phone buzzed with another message from the unknown number. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. This time, I didn't hesitate. This person, whoever they were, knew too much to be playing a prank. They knew about the insurance policies. They knew about my sons. They possessed details that only someone very close to our family could know. The next morning, I went to the bank where Ernest and I had maintained our account for 30 years, Mrs. Thompson. The manager, who had known us since we were young, greeted me with genuine sympathy. "Margaret, I'm so sorry about Ernest. He was truly a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I need to review our accounts. I have to understand our financial situation." She showed me bank statements from the past 6 months. What I saw froze my blood. During the last 3 months, substantial withdrawals had been made from our savings account, $1,000 in January, $3,000 in February, $4,000 in March. Money I knew nothing about had been systematically removed. Who authorized these withdrawals? I asked, my voice shaking. "Your husband came in personally," Mrs. Thompson explained. "He said he needed the money for shop repairs, but I managed our household accounts. I knew exactly how much money we had and what we spent it on. Ernest had never mentioned expensive shop repairs, and we had certainly never discussed withdrawing thousands of dollars from our savings. Do you have the signatures for these transactions?" She produced the receipts. The signature looked like Ernest's, but something about the handwriting seemed wrong. It was too shaky, too uncertain for his usually firm, clear script. "Mrs. Thompson," I asked with my heart pounding, "did he come alone for these withdrawals, or was someone with him?" She considered for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I believe he came with one of your sons once or twice. Charles, I think. He said he was helping his father with paperwork because Ernest had trouble reading the documents without his glasses." Charles. My son had been involved in money withdrawals I knew nothing about, using his father's aging eyes as an excuse. But Ernest saw perfectly well with his glasses, which he wore constantly during the day. That afternoon, as I stared at the bank receipts repeatedly, I received another message. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the evidence accumulating before me. The mysteriously increased insurance policies, the unauthorized money withdrawals, Charles's presence during transactions I knew nothing about, his suspicious efficiency in organizing the funeral, and his coldness during Ernest's final days. But the questions that terrified me were, if they had really planned Ernest's death, how had they done it? And who was sending me these messages with such intimate knowledge of what had happened? The following days became a nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every smile from Charles, every hug from Henry, every word of condolence felt like a mask hiding something sinister. But I needed more concrete proof before I could accept such a horrifying truth. My phone continued receiving messages from the mysterious number. Go to Ernest's shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. I decided to visit the shop for the first time since the accident. Charles had described a machine explosion, but when I arrived, I found something completely different from what I expected. The shop was strangely clean, far too clean to have been the scene of a devastating explosion. There were no burn marks on the walls, no debris, no signs of the destruction such a serious accident should have caused. "Where is the machine that exploded?" I asked aloud, examining every corner. I searched the entire shop and found every machine in its proper place, functioning perfectly. The welder, the compressor, the electric saw, all were intact and operational. What then had caused the accident that allegedly killed my husband? In Ernest's desk, I discovered something that sent chills through me, a handwritten note dated 3 days before his death. "Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for Margaret's protection, but something feels wrong. I don't trust his motivations." Below, that was another note. "Henry brought papers for me to sign. He claims they're to modernize the shop, but I don't understand what they're about. Why all this sudden urgency?" My husband had harbored suspicions. He had sensed our son's evil intentions, but he had died before he could warn me. I continued searching and found a sealed envelope with my name written on it. I opened it with trembling hands to find a letter from Ernest. "My dearest Margaret, if you are reading this, something has happened to me. In recent months, I've noticed disturbing changes in Charles and Henry. They're excessively interested in our money, in insurance, in us selling the house. Jasmine is putting tremendous pressure on them. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more concerned about my safety because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but those words sounded like a threat. I love you, Margaret. If something happens to me, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons." The letter slipped from my fingers. Ernest had anticipated his own death. He had recognized the warning signs that I, blinded by maternal love, had completely missed. That night, Charles came to visit with a bottle of wine and a smile that now seemed completely artificial. "Mom, I've been thinking about your future," he said, pouring himself a glass without asking if I wanted any. "The insurance money is already being processed. It will be $75,000. How do you know the exact amount?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Well, I helped Dad with the insurance paperwork. He wanted to ensure you'd have enough money to live comfortably." Another lie. Ernest had never wanted to increase the insurance. According to his own written words, he had been pressured by Charles. "What do you think I should do with that money?" I asked, carefully studying his reaction. His eyes lit up with a gleam that terrified me. "You could buy a smaller, more manageable house, or better yet, move into a nice retirement community where you'd have companionship and medical care available. Henry and I could manage your money to make it last longer." "Manage my money?" "We just want to take care of you, Mom. At your age, it's easy to get scammed or make poor financial decisions. We understand investments in business. We could triple that amount in a few years. Triple my money, or make it disappear into their own accounts." "Let me think about it," I said, trying to buy time. "Of course," he replied with false understanding. "But don't take too long. It's for your own good." After he left, I sat in my kitchen, trembling with rage and fear. My own sons, my flesh and blood, had not only murdered their father, but were now planning to steal everything I had left. That night, my phone vibrated with a longer message than usual. "Tomorrow, go to the police station. Ask for the accident report. There are contradictions you need to know about." The next morning, I went to the local police station. Sergeant O'Connell, who had known Ernest for years, greeted me with kindness. "An accident report for your husband?" he asked with a puzzled expression. "What accident, Mrs. Hayes?" The explosion at his shop? When the machine malfunctioned? The sergeant checked his files and shook his head. We don't have any report of an explosion at Ernest's shop. In fact, we have no record of any workplace accident involving your husband. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet, but my son said it was a shop accident. That's why he was hospitalized. Mrs. Hayes, your husband arrived at the hospital on Tuesday morning, but not from a workplace accident. According to the medical report I have here, he arrived unconscious with symptoms of severe poisoning. Poisoning. The doctors found traces of methanol in his blood, a quantity sufficient to cause blindness, brain damage, and eventually death. It hadn't been an explosion. It hadn't been a workplace accident. Someone had deliberately poisoned my husband. Why wasn't I told about this? I asked, my voice breaking. The immediate family members who signed the hospital paperwork requested that the information be kept confidential to avoid unnecessary speculation. They said you were too emotionally fragile to handle the technical details. The immediate family. Charles and Henry had hidden the true cause of Ernest's condition, fabricated the explosion story, and manipulated everyone, including me, to cover up murder. Mrs. Hayes, the sergeant continued, if you suspect foul play in your husband's death, we can open a formal investigation. I had more than suspicions. I was certain that my own sons had murdered their father for money. That afternoon, Henry arrived at my house with flowers and the same fake smile as his brother. How are you holding up, Mom? You look tired. I'm managing, I lied, observing his every gesture from this new, terrible perspective. That's good. Charles and I have been talking. We think you should sell the house soon, while the real estate market is favorable. Why the sudden rush? Well, older houses lose value quickly, and you need liquid assets for funeral expenses and pending medical bills. More lies. The funeral had been cheap, almost insultingly so, and there were no pending medical bills because insurance had covered everything. Henry, I said, looking directly into his eyes, you knew your father didn't die from a workplace accident? For a split second, I saw panic flash across his face, but he recovered quickly. What are you talking about, Mom? I went to the police station today. There's no report of any explosion at your father's shop. This time, the panic was unmistakable. Mom, you shouldn't be doing things like that. You'll only confuse yourself. Grief is affecting your judgment. Is grief affecting my judgment, or have you been lying to me? He stood up abruptly, spilling the coffee I had served him. I think you need to rest. We'll talk when you're thinking more clearly. He left hurriedly, but not before making a phone call from the porch. Although I couldn't hear his words, his tone was urgent and worried. That night, I received the most revealing message yet. They're coming together tomorrow. They're going to try to convince you that you're losing your mind, that grief is making you imagine things. Don't believe them, and don't eat or drink anything they offer you. The prediction proved exactly accurate. The next day, Charles and Henry arrived together, accompanied by Jasmine. They wore expressions of exaggerated concern and carried a bag of pastries from the downtown bakery. Mom, we're so worried about you, Charles began with artificial sweetness. Neighbors have told us you've been acting strangely. Doris says you've been talking to yourself and not eating properly. Doris had never said any such thing. It was just another lie in their growing collection. Jasmine brought your favorite pastries, Henry added, gesturing to the bag. And we made special coffee from that blend you love. I remembered the warning message. Don't eat or drink anything they offer. They might be planning to poison me just as they had Ernest. Thank you, but I already had breakfast, I said, maintaining distance. But Mom, Jasmine insisted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, you need to eat properly. You've lost so much weight since Papa Ernest passed. I'm fine, I replied firmly, Charles exchanged a significant look with Henry, the same look they had shared at the hospital when the doctor delivered Ernest's grim prognosis. "Mom," Charles said, moving closer, "we need to discuss something important. Henry and I have been consulting with medical professionals about your recent behavior." "My behavior?" "Yes, the strange questions you've been asking, visits to the police station, this obsession with irrelevant details about Dad's death. It's normal after such a tremendous loss, but it can become dangerous if left untreated." Henry nodded gravely. "We spoke with Dr. Albright. He says it's common for elderly people to develop paranoia after losing a spouse, especially women your age." Paranoia. They were accusing me of mental instability for uncovering their lies. "I am not paranoid," I said with all the strength I could summon. "I'm simply asking questions I should have asked from the beginning." "What questions?" Charles challenged. "Like why there's no police report for your father's supposed accident? Like why the shop is perfectly clean if there was an explosion? Like why you withdrew $8,000 from our account without telling me?" The silence that followed was deafening. All three exchanged looks of barely concealed panic. "Mom," Henry finally said, "those things have simple explanations. Dad withdrew that money for repairs he wanted to do secretly as a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "He wanted to renovate the house," Charles lied smoothly. "He had hired workers to fix the roof and repaint the walls. He wanted it to be a surprise for your birthday." If this were true, where were the workers? Where were the materials? Why hadn't anyone in town heard about this supposed renovation? And regarding the police report, Charles continued, "Not all workplace accidents require official documentation, especially when they occur on private property." More lies. Sergeant O'Connell had been very clear. Any workplace accident resulting in serious injury requires an official report. "Mom," Jasmine interjected with sweet but condescending tones, "we simply want to take care of you. That's why we think it would be best if you moved somewhere with specialized medical attention." "A care facility," Charles corrected, "for people experiencing complicated grief. They have psychologists, nurses, activities to keep you engaged." "And meanwhile," Henry added, "we can handle selling the house, managing the insurance money, all those complicated matters you shouldn't have to deal with in your current state." There it was, the complete plan. Declare me mentally incompetent, place me in a facility, and seize control of all my assets. First, they had murdered Ernest for insurance money, and now they wanted to rob me as well. And if I refuse? I asked, "Why would you refuse?" Charles asked with a chilling smile, "We only want what's best for you. Because this is my house. This is where I built my life with Ernest. This is where I raised both of you." "Mom," Henry said with an exaggerated sigh, "you can't live in the past forever. Dad is gone. You have to accept reality and move forward." "I have accepted it, but that doesn't mean I'm giving up my life and my money." The mask of concern began cracking from my sons' faces. Charles stood abruptly. "Fine. If you won't listen to reason, we'll have to take more serious measures." "What does that mean?" "It means we can initiate legal proceedings to have you declared mentally incompetent. We have witnesses to your erratic behavior. We have testimony from doctors confirming you're suffering from senile paranoia." "What doctors?" "I haven't spoken to any doctors about my mental state. Dr. Albright has already signed a preliminary report," Henry added. "Based on our descriptions of your behavior, he believes you need specialized care." A doctor who had never examined me had signed a report about my mental state based solely on what my sons told him. How much had it cost them to purchase that fraudulent evaluation? "So you can cooperate voluntarily," Charles continued, "or we can do this through the courts. Either way, you're going to get the help you need." It was a direct threat. If I didn't surrender my money voluntarily, they would use the legal system to steal it from me. I need time to consider this, I told them. Stalling. Of course, Jasmine said with false sweetness. But don't take too long for your own sake. After they left, I sat in my kitchen, shaking with rage and terror. My own sons, my flesh and blood, had not only murdered their father, but were now scheming to steal everything I had remaining. That night, my phone buzzed with the longest message yet. Margaret, this is Stephen Callahan, a private investigator. Ernest hired me 3 weeks before he died because he suspected Charles and Henry. They poisoned him with methanol in his morning coffee. I have audio evidence of their conversations, planning everything. Tomorrow at 3 p.m., go to Corner Cafe, sit at the back table. I'll be there. Finally, I would discover who had been sending these messages, and more importantly, I would have the proof needed to get justice for my husband's murder, but I also knew time was running out. Charles and Henry had revealed their hand. If I didn't act quickly, I would end up locked away while they spent the money that had cost Ernest his life. The war had begun. Even though I was a 66-year-old woman against 2 ruthless men, I possessed something they didn't, the truth. And truth, eventually, always finds a way to surface. That night, for the first time since Ernest's death, I smiled because I knew my husband hadn't died in vain. His caution, his instincts, his decision to hire a private investigator would allow me to achieve justice. Charles and Henry had seriously underestimated their mother. They were about to discover that a woman fighting for her murdered husband's memory is a force more powerful than all their greed combined. The next day arrived heavy with nervous anticipation. I dressed carefully, choosing my most serious navy dress, the one I wore for important occasions. If I was going to meet the man who could provide the answers I desperately needed, I wanted to be prepared for any revelation. At 2:30 p.m., I walked toward Corner Cafe with determined but cautious steps. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every person on the street could be a spy sent by my sons. The paranoia they had accused me of was beginning to feel justified. The cafe was moderately busy. I went directly to the back table as instructed, ordered chamomile tea, and waited, my hands trembling slightly on the worn wooden surface. At exactly 3 p.m., a man in his 50s approached my table. He was tall with graying hair, intelligent eyes, and a serious but kind expression. He carried a brown folder under his arm. Double quotes, Mrs. Hayes. He asked quietly. I nodded, not yet trusting my voice. I'm Stephen Callahan. I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Ernest was a genuinely good man. He sat across from me and placed the folder on the table. Before I show you what I have, you need to understand that what you're about to hear and see will be extremely painful. Are you ready? I've been preparing since I received your first message, I replied with newfound strength. Stephen opened the folder and retrieved a small digital recorder. Ernest came to see me a month ago. He was concerned about his son's behavior. He hired me to investigate them discreetly. He pressed play. Ernest's voice, so familiar and dear, filled the space between us. Stephen, you need to know that if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Charles and Henry have been pressuring me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, Charles brought papers he claimed would better protect Margaret. But when I read them carefully, I realized there were clauses that would directly benefit them as well. My heart raced. Hearing Ernest's voice was like having him back for precious moments. But his words confirmed my worst fears. The recording continued. Henry has been asking strange questions about my daily routine, what I eat for breakfast, what time I leave the house, whether Margaret comes to the shop with me. He says it's out of concern, but something about his questioning troubles me. Stephen paused the recording. This conversation was 3 weeks before his death. But I have something more recent. He played another recording, this time with Charles's voice clearly audible in the background. Talking on the phone, No, we can't wait any longer. The old man is getting suspicious. Yesterday, he asked why I was so interested in his insurance. Yes, I already have the methanol. It's perfect because the symptoms mimic a heart attack or stroke. No, Mom won't be a problem. After Dad dies, she'd be so devastated we can do whatever we want with her. Tears began streaming down my cheeks. It was my son's voice coldly planning his father's murder. There's more, Stephen said gently. This recording is from the day before Ernest's death. A new recording began, Henry's voice this time. Everything's ready. Tomorrow, Charles will put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it was a special vitamin supplement recommended by a doctor. The fool will drink it without suspecting anything. First, he'll experience dizziness and confusion, then vision loss, seizures, coma. Doctors will assume it's a stroke or heart attack. By the time they realize it's poisoning, it will be too late. My world completely shattered. They hadn't just planned Ernest's murder, they had executed it with terrifying coldness. How was it possible that my sons, the babies I had nursed, the children I had comforted through nightmares, were capable of such monstrosity? How did you obtain these recordings? I asked through sobs. Ernest asked me to place listening devices in your home, Stephen explained. He was frightened, but didn't know exactly why. We installed them on the home phone and in several strategic locations. He pulled out a series of photographs from the folder. I also have this, Charles purchasing methanol at a hardware store 30 miles from town. He paid cash and used a false name, but I have it on video. The photographs clearly showed Charles exiting a hardware store with a small bottle in his hands. The date stamp was 5 days before Ernest's death. And this, Stephen continued, showing me more documents. These are Charles and Henry's financial records from the past 6 months. They've been spending far more money than their incomes justify. Charles owes $70,000 to loan sharks in the city. Henry has gambling debts totaling $40,000. They were desperate. Everything began making sense. It wasn't just greed that motivated Ernest's murder. It was financial desperation. My sons were ruined and saw their father as a source of quick, easy money. Why didn't you go to police immediately after Ernest's death? I asked, because Charles and Henry are very clever. They bribed the doctor who treated Ernest at the hospital to alter the official diagnosis. Instead of poisoning, the death certificate was heart failure due to complications from a workplace accident. Without that medical evidence, my recordings might not have been sufficient for conviction. But now, with everything together, we have an airtight case. There's one more thing you need to know, Stephen said, gravely. My blood turned to ice. What? Your sons were planning to kill you too. Stephen played one final recording. This time, both Charles and Henry's voices together. Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to eliminate Mom as well, Charles said. We can't risk her becoming suspicious or someone else putting ideas in her head. How? Henry asked. Same method as with Dad, but this time we can make it look like suicide from depression. A widow who can't live without her husband. Nobody would question it. And then all the money would be ours as her sole heirs. The house, the savings, the insurance money, nearly $200,000 total. The recording stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably. My sons had not only murdered their father, but were actively planning to murder me as well. All for money. Mrs. Hayes, Stephen said softly, I know this is devastating, but we have enough evidence to ensure they pay for what they've done. What do we do now? I asked, wiping away tears. First, we go to police with all this evidence. Sergeant O'Connell is honest he's not involved in any corruption. Second, we need to act fast. Your sons are planning to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow. If they succeed, proceeding legally will be much more difficult. Tomorrow? Yes, I intercepted a phone conversation this morning. They're meeting with Judge Miller at 10 a.m. to initiate mental incapacitation proceedings. I stood from the table with determination I hadn't felt in weeks. Then we have to act tonight. Exactly, Stephen confirmed. But first, there's one more thing I want to show you. He produced one last photograph from the folder. In it, Ernest was leaving a medical clinic I didn't recognize. 3 days before he died, your husband went for a complete medical examination at a clinic in the city. The results show he was perfectly healthy. No signs of heart disease. Normal blood pressure. Everything was perfect. This definitively proves his death was caused by poisoning, not natural health problems. That was the final piece of evidence we needed. Ernest had been a healthy man, murdered by his own sons. Stephen, I said, taking his hand, thank you for keeping your promise to my husband. Now let's get justice. That same evening, Stephen and I went directly to the police station. Sergeant O'Connell was working the night shift, which was perfect for our purposes. When we arrived at 8 p.m., the station was relatively quiet. Sergeant O'Connell, I said firmly, I need to file a formal complaint for the murder of my husband, Ernest. The sergeant looked surprised. Murder, Mrs. Hayes? The death certificate indicates he died from heart complications following a workplace accident. The death certificate is fraudulent, I replied, placing Stephen's folder on his desk. My husband was deliberately poisoned with methanol by our own sons. For the next 2 hours, Stephen and I presented all the evidence, the audio recordings, photographs of Charles purchasing methanol, bank documents showing unauthorized withdrawals, Ernest's medical results proving perfect health, and finally, the recorded conversations where my sons confessed to both their father's murder and plans to kill. M.E. Sergeant O'Connell listened to each recording with increasingly grave expression. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head in disbelief. This is monstrous, he murmured. Are you certain you want to proceed, Mrs. Hayes? Once we arrest your sons, there's no turning back. Sergeant, I replied with all the dignity I could summon, those men murdered my husband in cold blood for money. They were planning to murder me as well. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals who must pay for their crimes. We'll need the medical examiner to exhume Ernest's body to confirm methanol presence, the sergeant explained. Are you prepared for that? Do whatever is necessary, I replied without hesitation. Sergeant O'Connell immediately contacted the district attorney. Despite the late hour, the case's severity brought the DA to the station personally. After reviewing all evidence, he immediately authorized arrest warrants for Charles and Henry. We'll proceed at dawn, the DA explained. We need to secure all evidence before they can destroy anything additional. Stephen walked me home that night. Are you sure you'll be safe alone? He asked with concern. I'll be fine, I replied. After everything I've discovered, I'm no longer afraid. I have justice on my side. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen looking at photographs of Ernest on the walls. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel only pain. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and satisfaction. Knowing justice for his murder was finally coming at 6 a.m., my phone rang. It was Charles. Mom, you need to come to Henry's house immediately. Something terrible has happened. What's wrong? I asked, feigning concern. It's better if I explain in person. Please come quickly. I knew it was a trap. After hearing the recordings the night before, I knew they were planning to accelerate their timeline for eliminating me. But I also knew police were already en route to arrest them. I'm on my way, I lied. Instead of going to Henry's house, I remained in my kitchen, waiting. At 7:30 a.m., I watched from my window as several police cars headed toward my sons. Houses in different directions. My phone rang repeatedly over the next hour. First Charles, then Henry, both with increasingly desperate voices asking where I was. I didn't answer any calls. At 9 a.m., Sergeant O'Connell knocked on my door. "Mrs. Hayes, we've arrested Charles and Henry. They're in custody, charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." My legs trembled, but this time from relief, not fear. How did they react? Charles denied everything initially, but when we played the recordings, he collapsed completely. Henry tried escaping through his back window. We had to chase him 6 blocks. That afternoon, Jasmine came to see me. She arrived sobbing, pleading, completely different from the cold, calculating woman I had known. "Mrs. Hayes, please, you have to drop the charges against Charles. He's not evil. He was just desperate because of his debts. This is my fault too." I pressured him constantly to find money. I looked at her without a trace of compassion. "Jasmine, your husband poisoned my husband. He was planning to murder me as well. There is no explanation or justification for that. But we're family." She screamed desperately. "Think about what this will do to the family." "The family died the day you decided to kill Ernest for money," I replied coldly. "Now please leave my house." 3 days later, Ernest's body was exhumed. Laboratory results confirmed exactly what Stephen had discovered: levels of methanol in his system, enough to cause all the symptoms he had experienced before death. The case became a sensation throughout the town. No one could believe 2 sons had murdered their own father for money. Local newspapers called it the decade's cruelest crime. Over the following weeks, more details emerged during investigation. Charles really did owe $70,000 to illegal lenders who had begun threatening violence. Henry had lost $40,000 in underground gambling and was also facing threats. They had seen Ernest's life insurance money as their only salvation, but their greed had led them to increase the policy so dramatically that it aroused their father's suspicions. We also discovered the doctor who falsified the death certificate had received $5,000 cash from Charles. He was also arrested for obstruction of justice and falsifying official documents. Stephen explained all the details of the plan Ernest had made with him. "Your husband was smarter than his sons believed. He knew something bad was coming, but didn't know exactly what. He hired me not only to investigate Charles and Henry, but also to protect you if something happened to him." "Did he know they were going to kill him?" I asked. "Not exactly," Stephen said, "but he suspected his life was in danger. That's why we installed recording devices. That's why we documented everything. He wanted to ensure that if something happened to him, the truth would surface. My husband, even in his final days, had been protecting me. He had anticipated our son's betrayal and taken steps to ensure justice would prevail." The trial was scheduled to begin in 2 months. Both Charles and Henry faced first-degree murder charges, which in our state carried sentences of 25 years to life. The trial day arrived after 2 months of intense legal preparation. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from several regional newspapers had come to cover what was already known as the Killer Sons case. The entire town was there, neighbors, Ernest's former co-workers, even people I barely knew who wanted to witness this historic moment of justice. I wore my best black dress, the same one I had worn to our wedding so many years ago, but which now represented mourning and dignity. Stephen accompanied me, sitting beside me throughout the entire proceedings. His presence gave me strength to face what would be the most difficult day of my life. Charles and Henry entered the courtroom in handcuffs, wearing orange prison jumpsuits. Seeing my sons like that broke my heart one more time, but I no longer felt pity for them. I felt only deep sadness for the moral death they had chosen long before they physically murdered their father. The prosecutor presented the case with devastating precision. One by one, the recordings were played for the court. Silence was absolute every time Charles and Henry's voices were heard coldly planning Ernest's murder. When the prosecutor played the recording where they planned to kill me too, several people in the audience gasped in horror. One elderly woman stood up and left the courtroom crying. I couldn't blame her. It was difficult to process such cruelty. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor said during opening statements, this is not an ordinary case of family greed. This is calculated premeditation where two men decided to murder the father who raised them with love and sacrifice simply because they needed money to pay gambling debts and irresponsible loans, Charles and Henry's. Lawyers tried presenting a defense based on desperate circumstances and external influences, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings didn't lie. The bank documents didn't lie. The forensic evidence of methanol in Ernest's body didn't lie. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with trembling legs but a clear mind. I had been waiting months for this moment. Mrs. Hayes, the prosecutor asked, can you tell us about your relationship with your sons before your husband's murder? I thought I had a good relationship with them, I replied, looking directly at Charles and Henry. I raised them with love. I sacrificed everything for their well-being. Their father worked from sunrise to sunset to give them the best we could. I never imagined that love and sacrifice would become the motive for his murder. At any point, did you suspect they could harm your husband? No, that's the most painful part of all this. I trusted them completely. When they told me Ernest had a shop accident, I believed them. When they organized the funeral so quickly, I thought they were being efficient in their grief. I never imagined they were covering up murder. Charles lowered his head during my testimony. Henry looked at me defiantly, but I saw tears in his eyes. Too late for tears. Too late for regret. The trial's most dramatic moment came when the prosecutor played the full recording of their conversation planning my murder. Charles's voice filled the courtroom. Once we have Dad's insurance money, we need to eliminate Mom too. We can't risk her getting suspicious. A murmur of horror swept through the audience. Several people turned to look at me with expressions of disbelief and compassion. How did you feel when you first heard this recording? The prosecutor asked. I realized I had lost my two sons long before I lost my husband, I replied, my voice cracking but firm. The babies I nursed, the children I comforted through nightmares, had died and been replaced by two strangers capable of any cruelty for money. The defense attempted to cross-examine me, suggesting maybe I had misinterpreted my son's intentions, that perhaps grief had made me exaggerate the evidence. But the recordings spoke for themselves. Stephen also testified, explaining in detail how Ernest had hired him because he feared his own sons. He described every step of the investigation, every piece of evidence collected, every recorded moment that revealed the truth. The medical examiner presented exhumation results, confirming lethal methanol presence in Ernest's body. He explained how this poison acts slowly, causing exactly the symptoms my husband experienced before death. After 3 days of devastating testimony, closing arguments arrived. The prosecutor was crushing. Charles and Henry are not victims of circumstances. They are predators who saw their own parents as financial obstacles to be eliminated. They planned, executed, and covered up Ernest's murder and were planning to do the same to Margaret. They don't deserve compassion. They deserve justice. The jury deliberated 6 hours. When they returned, courtroom silence was absolute. I could hear my own heartbeat as the judge read the verdict. In the case of State versus Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes on the charge of first-degree murder of Ernest Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Charles collapsed in his chair, finally comprehending the magnitude of what he had done. Henry remained rigid, staring straight ahead, expressionless. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Margaret Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The judge proceeded immediately to sentencing Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes for the premeditated murder of your father and conspiracy to murder your mother. I sentence you to life in prison without possibility of parole for 30 years. When I heard those words, I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. Justice. Finally, there was justice for Ernest Dot after the trial. Many people came to embrace me and express support. Doris cried with me, not from sadness, but from relief. Margaret, Ernest can rest in peace now, she whispered. That night, I returned to my house, which now felt different. It was no longer a place of pain and betrayal. It was my home again, the place where Ernest and I had been happy for 42 years. Stephen visited me a week after the trial. How do you feel? He asked. At peace, I answered honestly. For the first time since Ernest's death, I sleep soundly. I know he's resting because his death didn't go unpunished. And the money? The insurance? The savings? I donated the life insurance money to a foundation for family crime victims, I explained. That money was stained with blood. I could never have used it. My personal savings are enough to live modestly for the rest of my days. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from prison. It was from Charles. Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know I regret everything. The money, the debts, the desperation blinded us. We lost all humanity. Henry and I destroyed the most loving family in the world for $75,000 we didn't even get to enjoy. Tomorrow I will commit suicide in my cell. I can't live with what we did. Take care, Mom. Tell Dad we're sorry we were such terrible sons. I didn't arrive in time to prevent his suicide. Charles was found hanging in his cell the next day. Henry, upon learning of his brother's death, suffered a complete nervous breakdown and was transferred to the prison psychiatric hospital. Today, 2 years after the trial, I live peacefully in my small house. I converted Ernest's shop into a garden where I grow flowers to take to his grave every Sunday. Stephen has become a close friend, visiting regularly to ensure I'm well. Sometimes neighbors ask if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the children they were, but those children died long before Ernest did. The men they became were not my sons. They were strangers who shared my blood, but not my heart. I have learned that true family is not defined by blood, but by love, loyalty, and mutual respect. Ernest was my true family for 42 years. The friends who supported me during the trial are my family now. Justice didn't bring Ernest back, but it gave me peace. On quiet nights, when I sit on the porch where we so often shared coffee, I swear I can feel his presence, proud of me for being strong enough to do the right thing. Even when it meant losing my sons forever. 5 years have passed since that terrible day in the cemetery when I received the first message that changed my life forever. Today, I am 71 years old, and my completely white hair reflects all the storms I have weathered and overcome. But my eyes, my dear friend Doris tells me, shine with a peace they didn't have before. The house where Ernest and I built our dreams remains my refuge. I have made improvements with saved money, painting walls soft yellow, Ernest's favorite color, and turning his old shop into the neighborhood's most beautiful garden. Red roses, white carnations, sunflowers that always seek the sun, just as he taught me to do during our most difficult years. Stephen Callahan became more than the investigator who helped me achieve justice. He became my chosen family. He visits every Wednesday afternoon, and we drink coffee on the porch while he tells me stories about his other cases. He sometimes asks if I regret reporting my own sons, if it wouldn't have been better to keep the secret and live with the lie. Never, I always answer. Truth hurts, but lies kill the soul. The foundation I established with the insurance money has grown beyond my imagination. The Ernest Hayes Foundation for Family Crime Victims now helps dozens of families. annually who have experienced tragedies similar to mine. We have psychologists, lawyers, and private investigators all working to ensure no other family suffers in silence what I suffered. 6 months ago, a 40-year-old woman named Eleanor came to see me. She suspected her brother had murdered her mother for inheritance. Her story was painfully similar to mine. Greedy relatives, pressure to sell property, strange behavior after death. The foundation provided her with a private investigator, free legal advice, and psychological support throughout the process. When her brother was convicted 3 months later, Eleanor came to embrace me, crying that double quotes, "Mrs. Hayes, you saved my life. If you hadn't had the courage to report your own sons, I never would have had the courage to report mine." Those are the moments that remind me why all the pain was worth it. Henry is still alive, though he's no longer the same man. After Charles's suicide, his mind completely shattered. Doctors say he lives in constant guilt and paranoia, believing Ernest visits him nightly to scold him for the murder. He has attempted suicide 3 times, but prison guards keep him under constant surveillance. I receive letters from him occasionally. They are incoherent, full of desperate apologies and pleas for forgiveness. Initially, I read them, searching for traces of the son I raised with such love. But then I realized reading those letters only reopened wounds that had healed. Now I keep them unopened in a shoebox. Maybe someday I'll read them. Maybe not. I have the right to protect my peace of mind. Jasmine disappeared from town immediately after the trial. Someone told me she moved to the city and changed her name. I don't blame her. Carrying a murderer's surname must not be easy. Sometimes I wonder if she knew what Charles was planning, if she was a silent accomplice to Ernest's murder. But those questions belong to the past, and I have learned to live in the present. Spring Creek will never forget this case. It has become local legend, a story parents tell children as warning about greed and betrayal. Some see me as a hero, others as a cruel woman who sent her own sons to prison. I don't care what they think. I know the truth, and truth has given me needed peace. My health remains surprisingly good for my age. The doctor says it's because I finally freed myself from the stress and sadness I was carrying. The body heals when the heart finds peace. Sunday mornings are my favorite. I cut fresh flowers from my garden and walk to the cemetery to visit Ernest's grave. His headstone now has an inscription I had engraved after the trial. Ernest Hayes, beloved husband, betrayed father, honorable man. His love was stronger than death. I tell him everything that happened during the week. I talk about the foundation, about families we've helped, about thank you letters I received from people who found justice through our story. I swear I can feel his approval in the wind moving nearby tree leaves. Do you know what's strangest, my love? I said during my last visit, I no longer feel pain thinking of Charles and Henry. I only feel pity. Pity because they had all the love in the world and chose hate. They had a family that adored them and chose betrayal. They had the opportunity to be honorable men like you, and they chose to be murderers. Last week, a city reporter interviewed me for a documentary about family crimes. She asked what I wanted to say to others experiencing similar situations. Family is not an excuse for crime, I replied. Love is not blind. Love with boundaries is true love. If someone claiming to love you is capable of harming you for money or convenience, that person doesn't truly love you. And it's never too late to seek justice, no matter who the perpetrator is. This year, on the 5th anniversary of Ernest's death, I organized a special memorial ceremony. Over 200 people attended: neighbors, foundation members, families we've helped, local authorities. It was beautiful seeing how his death, which began as tragedy, had become a force for good in so many lives. Stephen gave an emotional speech. Ernest Hayes died because of his son's greed, but his legacy lives on in every family that finds justice through his wife's courage. Evil tried to destroy his story, but good transformed it into hope for others. At night before sleep, I sometimes take out old photographs from when Charles and Henry were children. I see them playing in the yard, embracing their father, laughing with me during past Christmases. I allow myself to cry for those innocent children who once existed before greed completely corrupted them. But I no longer cry for the men they became. Those men chose their destiny. Doubt my story became bigger than personal tragedy. It has become a symbol that justice is possible, even from the most unexpected sources. A 66-year-old widow proved that truth is more powerful than lies, that genuine love is stronger than betrayal, and that it's never too late to do the right thing. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and Stephen will come for coffee as always. I'll make his favorite pastries and tell him about this week's thank you letters. Afterward, we'll work together in the garden. Planting new flowers for spring. Life continues, simpler but more authentic than before. I have learned that true family isn't about shared blood, but about shared values. Mutual respect and love that never becomes harm. Ernest. Wherever you are, I hope you know I kept the promise I made at your grave that terrible day. I found the truth. I sought justice, and I transformed our pain into hope for others. Your death was not in vain, my love.